Hi guys, and welcome to One More Page, a podcast for lovers of kids' books.
Packed full of interviews, book reviews and industry gossip, not to mention the occasional fart joke, One More Page is your fortnightly foray into the world of children's books.
Whether you're a kid, mum, dad, author, illustrator, teacher, librarian, or just one of those people who never grew up, this is the podcast for you. So, let's meet your hosts.
I'm Kate, and I enjoy eating snails and frogs' legs, sashimi and steak tartare, but the idea of milk on my cereal is so repulsive that I won't even try it.
I'm Liz, and I like nothing better than sitting in a nest made of books, magazines, notebooks and pens, and my trusty phone and laptop, with a podcast playing, of course.
I'm Nat, and I love it when random kids talk to me on trains and in cafes. I almost never have anything important to do or anywhere important to be, so come over and have a chat. Please note this doesn't apply to boring adults or telemarketers. And this is... One More Page! Yeah. Today on One More Page, we're talking about all things that happen behind the scenes in the world of kids' book publishing. We'll be chatting to publisher Anna McFarlane from Allen & Unwin about how a book becomes a book. And in Kids Capers, we're having another mini guest interviewer picking the brain of illustrator Jules Faber, who has illustrated over 20 books, won a bunch of super impressive awards, and drew an awesome picture of our One More Page team in space that you can check out in our show notes.
Oh, that was such an awesome picture.
I know, and you know what?
What?
I've asked him to send me the original so that I can frame it and put it up in our office.
Oh my god!
I know.
Does our office mean actually your house?
It means my toilet. Sorry, Jules. Anyway, I just wanted to put it in the place I spend the most time and think the most. Oopsie. Love you. Bye. Sorry.
All right, moving on. Now it's time to give a shout out to something we think our listeners should know about. Liz, what do you have for us today?
Well, today I'd like to give a shout out to Picture Book Book Club, which is run by a bunch of Queensland-based library workers and picture book lovers. If you're picture book obsessed, whether you're a writer or a reader, you have to jump on board with these guys and their monthly Twitter chat. If you check out their website and read their blog, you'll find all the information you need. But basically, each month they have a theme, so it might be something like funny books or Australian animals, and they have a chat held on Twitter with a special guest author or illustrator. And everybody shares book recommendations by theme, and you have a chance to ask the special guests some questions. And you can search for it or follow along with the hashtag PickBookBC. They have a great Instagram account with guest shelfies as well, and we'll put all the links you need in our show notes.
Yeah, Picture Book Book Club. Love them. But now it's time for our guest interview, and it's going to be hashtag awesome. Kate, you're chatting to Allen & Unwin publisher Anna McFarlane. So enough of us and more of that. Take it away, Kate.
Anna McFarlane is a publisher of books for children and young adults at Allen & Unwin. During her career, she has published many best-selling authors and illustrators and worked for several publishers, including HarperCollins and Pan Macmillan. Whilst at Allen & Unwin, Anna has published Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff's award-winning and best-selling YA series The Illuminae Files, middle fiction such as the 2018 CBC notable book The Extremely Inconvenient Adventures of Bronte Metalstone by Jacqueline Moriarty, and multiple picture books, including the highly original book about microbes, Do Not Lick This Book, by Iden Ben Barak and Julian Frost. Hi Anna, and thanks for joining us here on One More Page.
Oh, hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
So your job title says that you're a publisher. What's a publisher? What does that involve on a day-to-day basis? And what's the difference between being a publisher and being an editor?
That's a good question. And the answer actually varies from country to country. I think in Australia, it's pretty consistent, though, that a publisher is responsible for bringing the books onto the publishing program, generally for running a list. Whereas the editor is responsible for helping the publisher achieve her or his vision and in shepherding the actual details of the book to publication. But there's a lot of blurring of those lines.
Sure. So do you get involved as well in the editorial side of it or not so much?
I can do, and depending on my time available and what kind of book I've signed up, sometimes if you sign a book up from a couple of chapters, maybe just an idea, the publisher will stay involved for a lot longer because they're helping that author achieve her or his vision. So, and I think generally it's the publisher who knows what they want from that book, and and the longer that you can stay involved in those kind of situations, probably the better.
Yeah, right. So if we go back a little bit, probably a number of years ago now, how did you get into publishing, or why and how did you get into publishing?
I had a very circuitous route into publishing, to be honest. I started, my course I did was a BA, but I did it in drama and I was training to be an actress. And I kind of fell out of love with acting and wanted to do something else and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I'd always worked with children just to kind of to raise a bit of money. So I'd worked in after school care programs since I was about 14, and I'd worked in childcare centres as well. And after I finished uni, I worked full-time with kids for a little while, still wondering what I wanted to do. And look, I had this kind of strange sort of epiphany when I'd just come back from overseas, and my dad, who's a children's author, had said to me, I've just, it's such a pity you've missed meeting my editor. She's just had to go back to Melbourne because they're interviewing for a trainee editor. And I just had this sort of light went off in my brain, and I thought, I really want that job. So I rang his editor and applied for that job, and I actually didn't get it, but I really enjoyed the process. I had quite an involved interview. I had to write blurbs. I had to do an editor text, I think, a picture book text. I had to pick an illustrator for the book. And it was very fun, actually. I really enjoyed it. And at the end of it, they gave me some feedback, and I decided it's what I wanted to do. So I went off and got the experience that they suggested. So from that point on, I went into magazines, actually free magazines, and did proofreading there, just volunteering, until I could actually find a way to make my way into the publishing world. But I did have to move states. So I was living in Adelaide at that point, and ultimately I moved to New South Wales, to Sydney, where most of the publishing houses were.
Wow, that's amazing. So would you be subjecting people to interviews like that these days? Is that still a similar sort of system?
Yes, I do. I mean, that sort of model has stayed. So if I'm interviewing for an editor, I will actually have a process a little bit like that. Like, we do give them a manuscript to look at and to respond to. We do ask them to write a blurb. We do ask them to suggest illustrators for books, because a lot of the picture books that we do, obviously we get a text first, and then some of the magic is in matching the text to somebody else's illustrations. So, you want to know that that editor has a good visual eye, or that they know a number of illustrators' work. So it is kind of the same.
Yeah, okay.
But it's a very good way of finding out whether somebody's really suited to children's publishing.
Yeah, and are there specific qualifications that someone might have if they're applying to be an editor, or are you fairly broad about what you'll accept in that regard?
I think we generally ask for a Bachelor of Arts. That's about all, just a university qualification. There are a lot of people now coming through who've got a lot more than that. And in fact, my current editor has a PhD.
Wow.
So.
Okay. Well, look, fair enough. It's a very important job. We want the picture books to be as good as they can be. And if that takes a PhD, then more power to them, I say. Okay. So now I'd love to find out a little bit about the process that a manuscript goes through between the time it arrives on your desk and the time I pick it up off the shelf in a bookshop. What happens there?
That is a really hard thing to answer, because every book has a different process. It absolutely does. So some manuscripts will come in and they won't require any work at all, and if it's a picture book manuscript, and you'll find an illustrator, and you won't need to work on the text very much, if at all. You'll give that text to an illustrator. The illustrator will come back to you with roughs. You'll advise the illustrator on the roughs. You'll then wait for the finished artwork. Then you'll brief a designer, and the designer will pull everything together. And, that's a picture book process differs from book to book. It's just kind of amazing. Some illustrators require multiple roughs. Some, are working, we worked with somebody recently who's she's a collage, she's a fine artist, and she works in collage. So there's no such thing as a rough really for her, because it's all physically done. So she showed us everything that she did, but it was finished art by the time we saw it. And then for fiction, some manuscripts require multiple rewrites. Some manuscripts require very little. it's one of the reasons it's a really interesting job.
Yeah, so it's like how long is a piece of string a little bit?
It is. I mean, I guess if you're a, a writer listening to this and you want to know what can I expect and you've written a novel of any length, I think you can expect a couple of editorial processes. One will be what's called a structural process, in which you'll receive a letter from either the publisher or the editor telling you the things they loved about your story and telling you the things that they wanted to see changed or improved. And then you'll see and then you'll go off and you'll do that revision. And then the next process you'll have will be another sort of copy editing process, in which an editor will go through with more detail. They'll look at how the story is put together, but they'll also be looking at language, continuity, logic, characterization, and they'll be giving you some notes about that as well. So they're the two main processes. And if your manuscript's relatively clean, you'll only have those two processes.
So it sounds like that takes a while. What would be a sort of average, if there is such a thing, or a fairly standard turnaround time for a novel?
I think I've actually got, because Allen and Unwin's quite organised, I do have like a recommended timeline for things. So I think the recommended timeline from manuscript to finished book for a novel is 18 months.
Okay.
So I've got to say, though, the reality is very different. But 18 months is a good thing to go by.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot involved, and, that time period reflects that. They don't just get kind of, snapped up, printed out and out the door.
No, they don't.
So when you're doing all of this, obviously you must have an eye for, or an ear in a way, for the things that you like and love. What would you say are the key things that make for a great children's book?
Often I'm using my gut instinct, I guess, which is a combination of my experience and my heart, I guess. I'm always looking for that really strong emotional connection, whether it's, laughing or crying or loving a character. I'm always looking to believe in what I'm reading, like forget that I'm reading, and just fall into the world. And I guess, there's something I used to say, and I was thinking about it today when I was thinking of what we were going to talk about. I can't think of a book that doesn't really fit this criteria, but I guess I always hope that a children's book on some level is wise. It has a common sense approach to life in some way, I guess, that is wise in some way. But there could be books that aren't wise that I love, but I just couldn't think of any. I think, funny, subversive books are wise as well, because I think it's wise to be funny and laugh at the world. So, it's a very open description.
Yeah, I was thinking that because you've done some very funny books in your career, haven't you?
Yeah, I've done some controversially funny books as well.
Yeah, but I definitely agree with that there's a certain truth underlying a lot of humor, isn't there? And that's in a way why we're laughing at it.
Absolutely. And it's really hard to do that well. And, it's one of the things that I often moan about, is that there aren't enough kind of avenues for people to talk about the craft of writing humor and what goes behind it, because it's incredibly hard to do well.
Yeah, it's really interesting you should say that, because we have actually, I think, an Allen and Unwin author, Lee Hobbs, coming up on the show.
Oh, fantastic.
We were going to have a chat to him about exactly that. So for our listeners, keep an ear out. So you've just gotten back from the Bologna Book Fair. What exactly is that, and what goes on there?
So the Bologna Book Fair is a trade fair for children's books specifically. It's run every year in the city of Bologna. It's a meeting of all publishers and agents from around the world who publish or agent children's books. It's got a very big illustrators component now, which has developed over the years. So there's also an illustrators showcase that happens at the same time. And it kind of takes over the city. So wherever you go in Bologna during that week, you're bound to find some publishing people sitting at a table somewhere talking books. So I go as a buying trip for Allen and Unwin. So I go to visit publishers from around the world. I see their rights people to look at what they're publishing and to see whether there's anything that should be brought back to Australia. And I also see literary agents as well. And then my colleagues, Angela Namoy and Carey Schroeder, they go to sell rights. So they take the Allen and Unwin books and have appointments with publishers from other companies to come and see what we've got on our books and what rights they might be interested in. So it's a rights fair where people buy and sell books, basically.
And this year, was there anything that really stood out? Was there something that everyone was talking about, or any books of yours that got snapped up?
Last year, I wasn't there, but a book I'd published was very hotly sought after, and I think has gone on to sell in 11 territories. And I was kind of like going, oh, I wasn't there for that, because it can be so exciting. But it was still exciting. But this year, the book that people kept asking me about was a book called Catching Teller Crow by Amberlynn Quaimalina and her brother Ezekiel Quaimalina, which Erica Wagner is actually publishing at Allen & Unwin. The rights are being handled by Jill Grinberg Literary Agency, so by somebody else, by Caitlin, I think there, Detweiler there. But there was just a lot of talk about it. They'd sent it out before the fair. The agent had said that there'd been a number of publishers interested and trying to preempt, and because they were running an auction. I lost count of the amount of people who asked me about it. So all the other territories became interested because of this big American deal that was happening, or this big American interest that was happening. So I feel like that was a really buzzy book. And the other thing that I noticed was that a lot of companies are producing full colour books that are kind of in between a picture book and a chapter book. So we've done some ourselves, actually, which have just kind of organically been, arisen, where we've thought, oh, this would look nice like this, and this is how many illustrations, and oh, yes, we can afford colour, and yes, it should be a hardback. And then I noticed now that there's at least, I think nearly every company I visited had some book or some program like that they were doing. So there's some really beautiful short fiction for sort of 5 to 7-year-olds, heavily illustrated, full colour pictures and hardbacks, kind of reasonably priced around. It's really quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds awesome. All right, so now that we're talking about books and things, are there any, this is an opportunity for you to tell me all about what Allen & Unwin has just out, coming out. What should people be interested in at the moment?
I know, and I've thought hard about this because, of course, there's quite a few books coming out, and I really can't single out. Well, I can't single out one without thinking of another one that I should also single out. But I thought what I might do is just put a plug in for a really interesting novel that we're publishing at the moment this month called Mun Mun by Jesse Andrews. And I'm putting a plug in for it because he's coming to Sydney, Melbourne and Perth as part of the Sydney Writers Festival and then the Scribblers Festival in Perth. And so it's really, really worthwhile finding his book and then going to see him. He's very well known because he wrote a book called Me and Earl and a Dying Girl, which he then wrote the screenplay for the film, and the film was a fantastic film, a fantastic adaptation, and a great success. He himself is hilarious, and his books are very funny, but they're also, Mun Mun's also very satirical, and it's kind of like nothing else I've ever read. So I highly recommend it. It's young adult or older, to be honest. You don't need to be a young adult to enjoy it. And it's set in an alternate universe where people's size is relative to their wealth. So it's a very, very social, a satirical commentary on contemporary America. And so I highly recommend it because then you can go see him and hear him talk. And he'll be talking, I think, with Patrick Ness, at least in Sydney and in Melbourne and maybe in Perth as well.
Wow, that sounds really, really interesting. I'll definitely have to keep an eye out for that. All right. Well, look, we're just about out of time. If anyone wants to check out Allen & Unwin's other releases, I assume they are all on the website?
They are indeed. allenandunwin.com.
Lovely. Well, we'll put a link to all of that and all of the various recommendations in the show notes so people can check them out. So thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kate.
That was great, Kate. I have to say, being a children's publisher sounds like my dream job, and I'm kind of really annoyed with my late teen self for not having one inkling of an idea to try and pursue that.
I reckon you're always angry with your young self for not being the thing that you wish you were now.
Yeah, but do you think your young self is like looking at you going like, Liz, what are you doing being a writer? You were supposed to be like a millionaire.
Yeah. Or even a half millionaire. Even if you had $10,000 in your bank account, that'd be great, Liz.
Well, guess what I wanted to be when I was a kid?
What?
Writer!
Oh!
I wanted to be a microbiologist. What about you, Nat?
I want to be an actor.
Well, there
This
you go.
is kind of like acting.
Except without the action.
I actually know I wanted to be an astronaut at one point when I was young.
Oh, well, maybe next week, eh?
Oh yeah, next week I might be able to vicariously live through someone who's not only a successful writer but also writes about space. She's got everything. Anyway, speaking of next week,
Speaking of, yes, I'm going to be chatting with picture book author Shelley Unwin about her new book, Blast Off, illustrated by Ben Wood, which is a fun and informative romp around the planets of the solar system. The book's just been released, and I'm really excited to be chatting with her about it.
I'm really impressed with my unintentional segue right there. Did you like that?
I
I actually feel like next episode might be especially for me because you know that I love rockets and stars and aliens and stuff. It's going to be awesome. And Shelley's awesome. And if you heard me go on about small and big on episode 3, you'll know I'm a huge fan of Ben Wood's illustrations. So it sounds like a match made in space. Ba-dum-tsh. And while we're on books that done did get us excited, let's see what's on everyone's What You're Reading list this week. You're up first, Liz.
So I've just read an ABC Books title called A Garden of Lilies, written by Prudence A. Goodchild, who you might also know as Judith Russell. If you've ever read her Stella Montgomery books Withering by Sea or Wormwood Mire, you would remember that Garden of Lilies was the book referred to, full of cautionary tales of the really frightening kind. Well, now Garden of Lilies is no longer a fictional book within a fictional book, but a real book. Make sense?
No, I'm so confused right now. But I'm often confused, so there's nothing new there.
Okay, well, you know what? I reckon our listeners that have read those books will totally know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so it has a subtitle, Improving Tales for Young Minds, and it's full of short stories. Most of them are just 1 or 2 pages long with illustrations as well. And they're like a tongue-in-cheek take on the types of tales kids in the Victorian era really read. They're full of warnings not to be greedy, lazy, or loud, with a consequence at the end of each story. Things like being eaten by a tiger or drowning in a shipwreck. And while it sounds scary, I really think that smart readers from age 7 and up will recognise these tales as much too far-fetched to be real, and they'll actually find them humorous. And I'm sure will make them feel relieved just how far books for kids have come. It also has a beautiful gold embossed cover and a ribbon bookmark, so it's also got a real keepsake feel.
I can't believe I haven't heard of this book, and I also kind of can't decide whether to be excited because there's a new book by Judith Russell out. I mean, Prudence A. Goodchild, or annoyed because why isn't she off writing the next Stella Montgomery book? It's been ages since the last one came out.
Well, I think she might be writing the 3rd Stella Montgomery book, but this is a good one to kind of tide us over until that one comes out. So what have you been reading, Kate?
Okay, so my book this episode is based on a recommendation by Jess Walton, who you might remember was a guest on the show a few episodes ago. It's called My Mum is a Magician, and it's by Damon Young and Peter Carnivus, published by the University of Queensland Press. When we did our interview with Jess, who's an amputee, she talked about how few books there are with disabled characters and how much she'd love to find more books that she can share with her kids. A little while after we'd done the interview, I saw this tweet from her on Twitter. Cried happy tears reading My Mum is a Magician to my kids. My wife had to take over. Why? One of the mums in the story is an amputee and wears a prosthetic leg. Just like Mummy, my kids said. Representation matters. So with a recommendation like that, I decided I had to check it out. And it really is a wonderful celebration of mothers and their differences. It's not just about their relationship with their kids, but also about the amazing things that mums can do as well as being a mum. The characters are diverse and empowered, and they're beautifully illustrated by the wonderful Peter Carnivus. So if you're looking to celebrate Mother's Day with a book this year, this could be a good one to check out.
Yeah, it's so cool how the mums in that book are illustrated as diverse characters just because they are. Like it's not like a story about an amputee but the mums are diverse, they look different, they do different things, they have different cultural backgrounds, and the book just shows it. I think it's really beautiful, and it should be the case in more and more kids' books moving forward.
Definitely. So Nat, you're up. What have you been reading lately?
Okay, well, thanks to the 5 Mile Press, I got my hands on The Long Class Goodnight by comedian Sammy J. It's Sammy's first book, and although I love him as a comedian, I was interested to see how his somewhat sort of childlike but adult-focused humour translated into a middle grade book. I wasn't disappointed. From the moment I read the transition from chapter 1 to chapter 2, I knew this was going to be my kind of book. The day before his first day of high school, the main character Justin gets told by his parents that he's a loser, from a long line of losers, and there's no escaping his destiny. But Justin is just not willing to take this at face value. So, end of chapter 1 transitions into chapter 2 like this. Tomorrow, I'll forge my own destiny, he whispered. I'll make new friends and learn new things, and there won't be a spitball in sight. The first spitball landed on Justin's head at 9:47 a.m. It was just like such a hilarious transition. I actually laughed out loud on the train and people looked at me, but people often look at me weird on the train, so it's fine. And so begins the longest first day of high school in history. Set in the weirdest school ever with teachers who behave like imbeciles, it is up to Justin to set right the wrongs of Mount Willow Secondary School. For lovers of David Wellams, it's a laugh-out-loud book about finding your place, not accepting your so-called fate, and embracing your inner nerd. Just like me and Sammy J. I think we have inner nerd in common. And Kate and Liz. Actually, we're all got inner nerds.
Nah, I have an outer nerd, I think. There's nothing inner about my nerd.
You're actually wearing it like a coat.
Yeah.
Like a suit of armour. My outer nerd protects me from all. All right, well, now it's time for our always exciting book giveaway. Kate, what's our latest prize?
This episode, we have 2 copies of the new picture book, The Flying Optometrist, to give away. It's written by Joanne Anderton, illustrated by Karen Erasmus, and published by the National Library of Australia. This book was actually inspired by the author's father, who travels around the countryside in a self-built plane, delivering eye care to rural communities. As well as the fictionalised storyline, it's got some great non-fiction sections, and it's beautifully illustrated by Karen Erasmus.
That sounds fantastic. Sounds like a really great idea for a book. So to be in the running, go to our competition page at onemorepagepodcast.com/win and tell us in 25 words or less what you think would be the best thing about working in children's publishing.
All right, kids, it's your turn at last. Chuck a massive wheelie, eat nothing but chips for a week, and change your name by default to Nat, because it's time for... It's time for Kids Capers. Ooh, kids capers. Uh-oh, bring on the Kids Capers.
I love it.
Thank you.
What's up?
So this week we have another kid interviewer taking the reins. And no, I'm not being lazy. It's just that illustrator Jules Faber wanted a mature and serious interview. And so I was outed and we brought in 9-year-old Zara to make things a little more professional. So... let's have a listen. And, Liz, I think you're on foot rub duty this week, right?
No.
Kids Capers! Hi, Jules.
Hello, Zara.
I'd like to ask you some questions about your job as an illustrator.
Cool, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, the first one is, can you tell me how you first got your illustrations published? What was it for, and how did you react when you found out?
Okay, it was a long time coming. I'd been working for myself, drawing people in many different ways. Like I worked in animation, I had a comic strip.
Cool.
I was an editorial cartoonist as well, drawing for newspapers. I'd been a magazine illustrator too, and I'd also go to special events where I would do like 5-minute cartoon drawings of people for entertainment. I'd always been a member of the Australian Cartoonists Association, and as part of membership, you get a portfolio of work on their website. So when Scholastic were looking for a cartoonist or an illustrator for this new book series, they saw my work there and asked me if I was interested in drawing it. And I did a test, which they loved, and I got the job. And so that series became the Weirdo series, as it turns out. So from the popularity of that series, other publishers were interested in my work, and now illustrating kids' books is mostly what I do.
Cool. How do you think of ideas for your illustrations? Does anything from real life end up in your drawings?
I think the measure of a good author is when I don't need to come up with ideas for the drawings because the text makes it really clear. Like anyone else, when I'm reading, I'm seeing the action going on in a little movie in my head. So my job is essentially to just take that little movie from inside my head and show you what I'm seeing in pictures. So visualizing things is a very important tool to develop, and the easiest way to practice it is to read lots and lots of books. Like picture books and chapter books are great, but it's also important to read books with no pictures so you can develop that visualization ability.
Yeah.
All sorts of things from real life turn up in my books, in my work. One of the things most important to me, oftentimes I'll put people that I know in the background or stuff like that. But one thing in one of the series that I work on, I won't say which one, my daughter is growing up in the background. You can see her occasionally pop up, and she's aging in the background of each book in a particular series that I work on.
Cool, now I'm going to hunt for which series that is. Can you tell me what's involved in illustrating a Weirdo book from start to finish?
Okay, well, first of all, I get the manuscript from my editor. That's the full story of what's been written. she will have made notes throughout suggesting what she thinks would make the best illustrations. For the most part, this is what I work with, but occasionally I'll make a change or suggest something different. Then I sit down and rough out all the illustrations, and that will take me about 7 or 8 days, depending. I draw like 20 or so drawings a day if I can, depending on how hard they are, or if they're like crowd scenes or whatever. Crowd scenes take forever, and I don't like them. They're my least favourite thing to draw. So then when all that's done, my editor and I will go through them together, and if she wants me to make any changes, I'll do them right then and there, just fixing the drawings as we go through them. And, whether that's adding characters or changing a pose or an expression or adding a close-up or something like that. And so then once the roughs are all approved, which takes us about an hour or so to get through them, we usually go and have it over coffee, I'll take them home and get to work inking them. And that process will take me another week or so, maybe inking 20 or so drawings a day.
What's inking?
Inking, when I say inking, that means I'll take the rough, which is just pencils, and I'll put it on a light box. And then over the top of that, I'll put card, and then I'll do a nice clean ink drawing of the drawing to get the pictures that you see in the book, nice black and white drawings. And so when they're all finished, I'll take them back to Scholastic, and that's it. My job's done. So then, there's a bunch of other clever people who scan them all and put them into the pages of the book and lay it out so nicely, and then they send it to the printer. And so the whole process to me takes me just, for example, the first Weirdo book that I ever did took me about 6 months or so, because I lived in Coffs Harbour then, and I had to sort of send everything via email back and forth and make changes, and I was a bit shy about sending sort of really messy drawings, so I cleaned up all these drawings, and it took me a long time. Plus, I had to design everything in the Weirdo universe. But now, the latest book that I did, which was Weirdo Book 11, which will be out later in the year, like October or something, that one only took me 11 days.
Wow, that's quick.
I've been practicing getting faster and faster at it. I think I could still be a little bit quicker, because I had a day where I didn't work in there. So we'll see when the next one comes along, I guess.
Cool. What's been your favourite project to work on, and why?
I love working on all my projects because I get really bored working on the same thing all the time. But one project that does stand out a little above the rest was a book called Helix and the Arrival by Damien Posner. It was all about like prehistoric cave people. So I got to draw lots of big hairy cavemen and big hairy cave women and saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that. It was great fun. Plus, everyone had bare feet. And I found out I really like drawing feet for some reason. I don't know why. And there was this one character in the book called Salika, she was this really tough girl. She had like feathers and plaits in her hair, and she had bandages on her wrists and grazed knees. And I love to draw her heaps, like best. She was just the greatest fun to draw. And I really hoped that book would become a series so I could keep drawing all those characters, but it didn't, unfortunately, occur.
Oh, no.
Which happens sometimes in publishing. We have big dreams for what may come, and unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way.
I quite like cartooning, so do you have any advice to share on how to get better at drawing?
Well, that's great that you love cartooning. I do too, obviously. The good advice, there's a very common action that anyone can use, and I always recommend it when people ask me how to improve at their drawing. It's free, and it's available to anyone who wants it. And what's more, you don't even need expensive equipment to use it either.
What is it?
Practice. It's how we get better at anything. It's how we learn to walk and talk and write our name and dress ourselves and like eat with a fork. So practice is how we get, that kind of rhymed a bit. Practice is how we get better at anything. And it holds just as true with drawing. You've got to remember that no one is born with the ability to draw. It's a learned skill, just like walking and talking and all that other stuff that we do every day.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And I'm not saying that it's easy, because it's often not, even for people like me who do it all the time, but it is rewarding, and you can never get worse at it, which is really cool, I think. You can only ever keep getting better. So every drawing you do is better than the last, theoretically. And as you keep drawing, you'll see how you're improving. So, practice is it. I always say to also never give up, because it's supposed to be fun. So don't forget to have fun with it. Even the challenging parts can be fun. And it's important to not lose sight of that. You've just got to keep drawing, keep practicing, keep at it.
Cool. That's really good advice. Thank you, Jules, for talking to me today.
That's okay. It's been absolutely a pleasure.
Kids Capers!
Oh, Zara did such a good job. That's it. I'm out. I'm going to be on holiday for the rest of the year.
Oh, but I am not giving you foot rubs every time.
Oh, don't pretend you don't enjoy it. And I tell you what, that Jules man, he's awesome. I think I'm going to have to move his picture from the toilet out into the lounge room.
Ooh, or like on the castle, straight to the pool room.
Yeah, problem is I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Sydney. I don't have a pool room.
Nobody has a pool room in Sydney.
That's so true.
All right, so guys, we've got a listener question this episode coming from Westall Primary School in Victoria, and it's a tough one. They've asked, if there was only one children's book left in the world, what would you choose it to be?
Oh, well, that's kind of like choosing your favourite child, which I've heard is difficult, although I had no problem in choosing a favourite child in my family. It was me. But one book that's almost too painful to consider, but I'm going to clench my teeth and say Uncanny by Paul Jennings. My childhood wouldn't have been the same, and I wouldn't have dreamed of being a writer if it wasn't for Paul Jennings. And Uncanny, I think, was my absolute favourite.
Yeah, it's a really hard question, but I'm going to go with a picture book, so I've got something to read and great illustrations to look at too. And Herman and Rosie by Gus Gordon is my pick. A gorgeous story with a New York City setting about two characters following their passions and finding each other. The story evokes all the senses and transports you to New York, while the characters are quirky and endearing.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky because the idea of only having one children's book in the world is pretty much too appalling to contemplate. So I'm going to choose Andy Griffiths and Terry Denton's book Once Upon a Slime, 45 Fun Ways to Get Writing Fast. Because basically, if there's only going to be one children's book left in the world, we'll need all the kids to be getting out there writing and illustrating their own books to fill in the gap. What do you think? Cheating or not cheating?
Hey, we're not above a bit of cheating when it's for a good cause.
Speak for yourself, Nat. All right, now it's time to find out what's on our radar. Something we've just discovered or something we're looking forward to or obsessing over. Kate, what's on your radar right now?
What's on my radar this week is the Sydney Writers' Festival Kids and Family Day, which is on this Sunday, the 6th of May. I know my kids are really excited about it, and I am too. There are going to be some great ticketed events, but there's also heaps of free kids stuff, including a May Gibbs colouring in wall, on-the-spot stories, where James O'Loughlin and Andrew Cranner write and illustrate a story in less than 2 hours, and a Storytime Clubhouse featuring some of our absolute favourite picture book authors and illustrators here at One More Page, like Deborah Tidball, who wrote The Scared Book, Tim Miller, who wrote There's a Monster Under My Bed Who Farts, Sian Danthes, who wrote and illustrated Zoom, and Ronna Joy Gosh, who wrote and illustrated Ollie and the Wind. If you've been before, please pay attention. It is not at the Wharves this year. Do not go there. It's on at the Carriage Works, which is right near Redfern Station, super accessible by public transport. So if you're a Sydney-sider like us, there is no excuse not to go.
And if you're from Melbourne or Brisbane, there's these great things they've invented. They're called planes, and you can get on them and they'll fly you all the way to Sydney so you can join us for the Writers' Festival Kids and Family Day. Be there or don't be there, and that would be really sad. Okay, now next week, don't forget, we'll be talking to picture book author Shelley Unwin about all things spacey.
Oh, I can't wait for that. But it's a shame we're wrapping up already. It's gone way too quickly.
No, we want one more page.
Yeah, it's true, but you can join us again in a fortnight for
One more page.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Page. Read the show notes and find all our episodes at www.onemorepagepodcast.com. Don't forget, you can also subscribe via the iTunes Store or your favourite podcast app.
We love to receive listener questions and hear any kids' book news or reading recommendations. Chat with us on our Facebook page or find us on Twitter and Instagram at OneMorePageAU. You can also email us at onemorepagepodcast@gmail.com.
A big thank you to Marianne Koo, who does all of our illustrations. That's it from us this time, but we hope you can join us next time for one more episode of One More Page.
This week it was a 3-way blooper. We all had different scripts. They all said it was someone different's turn to speak next, and we all got very confused. It's a really great book, in case you're wondering. All right, well,
Come on, Liz. Oh, it's not Liz? It's Nat.
It's me. That's why I was continuing.
Okay, sorry. It says Liz here on the piece of paper that I've got.
Changed. You printed it out too early.